In today's increasingly global and interconnected world, 55% of the world's people now live in urban areas. The coming decades are expected to bring a continued gradual increase in the percentage of the world's population that resides in cities and urban areas. The shift toward urban living has been happening in all regions of the world. It is one of the 4 demographic megatrends that are reshaping human society and the world, the others being population growth, population aging, and international migration. For the systematic tracking of levels and trends in urbanization throughout the world, the Population Division of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations has issued a recurrent series known as World Urbanization Prospects since 1988. The series provides estimates and projections of the size of the urban and rural populations of all countries and of the populations of cities or urban agglomerations above a threshold of 300,000 inhabitants. Today, we are releasing the results of the 2018 revision of World Urbanization Prospects. Urbanization is considered a megatrend because it represents a fundamental historical change with major consequences across all dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. The recent session of the Commission on Population and Development explored the theme of sustainable cities, human mobility, and international migration. During the session, both member states and other speakers emphasized that well-managed urban growth can help cities to reap the benefits of agglomeration while minimizing environmental damage and other potential adverse impacts of growing numbers of city dwellers. When cities are growing, the need for essential infrastructure and services increases as well. When urban growth is rapid, ensuring access to housing, water, sanitation, electricity, public transport, education, and healthcare for all is especially challenging. For densely settled urban populations, however, infrastructure and services can often be provided in a more economical and less environmentally damaging way compared to providing similar support to a dispersed rural population. The level of urbanization now stands at 1/2 or more in all major geographic regions except Africa. This refers to the percentage of the population that resides in urban areas. In terms of economic production, the increasing weight of urban areas is even more pronounced. As a result, managing urban growth to ensure that it is sustainable has become one of the most important development challenges of the current century, especially in low-income and lower-middle-income countries where the most rapid urbanization is expected to occur between now and 2050. Urban policies will play a key role in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Success or failure in building sustainable cities will influence a country's chances of achieving several targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. Dear colleagues, the 2018 revision of World Urbanization Prospects presents the latest United Nations estimates of the size of urban and rural populations for 233 countries or areas from 1950 to 2018, with projections until 2050. It also includes data on population size for close to 1,900 urban settlements having 300,000 inhabitants or more in 2018. These 1,900 cities or urban areas are now home to nearly 60% of the world's urban population. The latest revision highlights some important patterns and trends in global urbanization and city growth. Allow me to highlight a few of the key findings. First, well over half of the world's population now lives in urban settlements. By 2050, it's projected that just over 2/3 of all humans will reside in urban areas. Second, the growth of the world's urban population will continue to be driven by 2 factors. One is the overall growth of the world's population, which is projected to continue in the coming decades. The other is the continuing shift in place of residence from rural to urban areas. Both factors, overall growth and the shift toward urban residence, will drive the urbanization and the urban growth that is projected for the future. It is projected that around 2.5 billion people will be added to the world's urban population by 2050. Over 90% of this increase will take place in Asia and Africa, emphasizing the need for action, especially in these geographical regions. Third, in 1990, there were just 10 megacities globally, defined as cities with 10 million inhabitants or more. Together, these 10 cities were home to 150 million people, or just under 7% of the global urban population at that time in 1990. Today, in 2018, there are 33 such megacities worldwide, and they represent 13% of the world's urban population. By 2030, the world is projected to have 43 megacities, most of them located in developing countries. Fourth, Tokyo remains the largest city in the world with 37 million inhabitants. Delhi, however, is projected to surpass Tokyo as the world's largest agglomeration around the year 2028. It's interesting to note that around the same time, India is expected to surpass China as the country with the world's largest total population. Fifth, in many discussions of sustainable development, there is a tendency to focus on the growth of very large cities, including megacities with 10 million inhabitants or more. These cities are indeed very significant, both demographically and otherwise. Many are hubs of international economic and financial activity. However, these latest estimates demonstrate that almost half, around 48% of all urban dwellers, reside in settlements with fewer than 500,000 inhabitants. Consequently, a successful urban planning agenda will require a focused effort on ensuring the sustainable development of urban settlements of all sizes. In short, ladies and gentlemen, this latest revision of World Urbanization Prospects provides valuable information on levels and trends in urbanization and city size. The updated data set will inform policymakers and planners throughout the world on the scale of changes taking place in urban and rural populations and on the resulting challenges and opportunities for achieving sustainable development. Lastly, I wish to note that this new data set is the result of many months of work by several colleagues in the Population Division, some of whom are in the room today. I would like to acknowledge the dedicated and hardworking staff of the United Nations who have contributed to the work being released today. And I would be happy to receive your questions at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So we'll open the floor to questions. I ask that you state your name and organization, please.
Thank you. Ariana King with the Nikkei Asian Review. So you mentioned this statistic, 90% of the population growth will take place in Asia and Africa. I was wondering if you could break that down, how much of that is Asia, how much of that is Africa? And if you could speak a little bit more about the growth in Asia in particular, how the findings from this year's report may have changed from the 2014 report. Thanks.
I'm referring to my colleague, Mr. Pelletier, who may have that answer for you, and the breakdown of I believe it's 90% of the urban growth is going to occur in Asia and Africa. Also a large percentage of the total growth, but the 90% refers specifically to urban growth. How does that break down of that 90?
In terms of the division between the two, I don't have the exact number, but the share of the urban population in the world, in Africa, will be growing faster than in Asia. In Asia, it's stabilizing the share. But Asia's population overall is much larger, and so the proportion is also important, but in terms of numbers, the absolute numbers, but the share in Africa will be growing more rapidly. I would not say there are significant variations. We have to bear in mind that this is also related to the growth of the total population, so there could be variations in the numbers of the total population, which affects the urban population. But overall, I would say the trends are fairly similar.
One characteristic of the process of urbanization is that it's rather stable over time. It doesn't change a lot. There are not a lot of unexpected trends. It's something that changes very slowly over time. So we tend not to have major surprises from one revision to the next.
Especially at the aggregate level. At the country level, there could be some variations, and based on revision, new information that came in. But the more you aggregate to a larger regional group, the more these differences cancel themselves out.
So then, specifically about country changes, I'm wondering how much, if you've looked at all at how much policy affects, so for example, immigration policy might bring in people from other countries and into urban populations, if you have any data on that, or if you'd looked at that?
Within the work of the World Urbanization Prospects, we don't break it down by components of population growth. We do that in the World Population Prospects. But overall, I would think migration does not play a significant role for the total urban population of a country, though it may for specific cities. The role of migration for cities can be quite important, including internal migration within a country, including in parts of Asia and China. The internal migration has a significant impact on the growth of cities.
I could just follow up on that to say that indeed this was the topic that was considered by the Commission on Population and Development this year, this in some ways the intersection between urban growth and international migration. And there are certain cities known as gateway cities that serve as important points of entry and transit for international migrants. They're large cities around the world that are highly diverse with populations from migrants from many different countries who reside there or who are passing through at some point. There's a lot of exchange, cultural exchange that takes place in these cities, and they're places, nodes in the networks of movement of people internationally. So cities are extremely important in the process of international migration, but as my colleague François was saying, as a percent of the total urban growth, international migration is a part of that, but we wouldn't expect, I don't know if we have the exact number to give you, but I would not expect it to be a very large part of the total.
We need to distinguish also between internal migration and international migration. International migration may not affect substantially the growth of the urban population of countries. Internal migration, on the other hand, it's an important component.
Just to bounce back on that, so in your opinion, is urbanization, is it a positive trend or a negative one, especially when it comes to continents or countries like in Africa, for instance Nigeria, they have like mega cities like Lagos, and so is it something to look at as a positive thing from these countries' perspective, or is it more trouble for them? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so challenging question, but overall, I think we have to see urbanization as a positive thing in the context of sustainable development in a world with more than 7.5 billion people. The increasing concentration of people in cities provides a way of more economically providing services and making sure that the population has access to essential infrastructure and services, because it's much easier to provide those services for a concentrated population. I mean, just the costs of service delivery and so forth are much less, and as a result, we find that urban populations have better access to health care and education. It's not surprising because it's much easier to deliver those services. So overall, there are many advantages in terms of cost for delivering the services that the population needs if they're concentrated in cities. And also, it concentrates the environmental impact in one area and allows to preserve other areas of the land and provides a way possibly to minimize the environmental impacts that humans are having on the earth. So overall, I think you have to see urbanization as a positive thing. However, the challenge is that in many countries, it's taking place so rapidly and at relatively lower levels of development than had been the case in the developed countries where this urbanization took place much earlier. And therefore, you can have situations where cities have developed and large slum areas have developed that are not maybe achieving the goals of sustainable development the way that we would like. So there's an emphasis on well-managed urban growth to make sure that the growth that takes place is well-formed and planned. Yeah.
I'm Ellen Wolforth of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Just to follow up on that, the emphasis on how cities need to be how to manage this well. In your opinion, are most cities prepared for this influx? Are there problems looming, or can everybody handle it? What do you think?
I don't know that I have a global answer to that question. I think at some point I have to defer to our colleagues at UN Habitat, who are really the experts in how cities manage these issues. We deal with the numbers. We try to give the global perspective on this, but a judgment about how well cities are actually dealing with this, I'm not sure that I'm going to try to give you an answer to that. To be honest, I'm not sure that I'm qualified. So.
Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coast for Access. Thanks for doing the briefing. I wanted to ask about, I don't know if you're talking about sort of raw numbers of moving back and forth. Have you looked at income? What I wanted to know is in many cities, and I don't know if it's limited to the developed world. Maybe you'll answer, like gentrification, the idea that as more people want to live, or even distribution of people within cities, are lower income people in the various regions that you're looking at being driven out of center cities to further away from job prospects. Does your study look at that? What part of the UN system looks at it? And the thing I also wanted to ask is, it seems like you're saying that there should be more urban planning because more people are in cities. So the UN has this agency called UN Habitat. It's reported that it might move out of Nairobi. It's reported that the panel that studied it said it wasn't really living up to its mandate. What's the connection between the study that you've done and the Secretary General and his plans to actually have the UN's arm on urbanization become more effective?
Now I'm sorry. The second question was intriguing, and I've forgotten what the first one was.
Basically gentrification, but also
gentrification.
Income. Are you just looking at raw numbers or at distributions within cities?
Matthew, I'm afraid I may not have a very satisfactory answer for you on either question. The gentrification issue, there are specific examples of that I'm aware of. We didn't look at it systematically in this study. It's not something that we've done in a systematic way to look at these gentrification issues. So I really can't give you, again, any kind of global summary. I think you'll probably find examples of all types if you look globally at that sort of issue. And as far as the connection with UN Habitat, and their role, I really wouldn't be prepared to comment on that, on the role of that particular agency. We have some contact with them. They're aware of this work. We've worked together with them on some topics, but I really don't have a global perspective on the future of that agency and their place within the UN system. So, sorry, not a very satisfying answer, I realize, but.
Not the first time in this room.
Yeah, this is just a small question. You say that more than half the world's population now lives in cities. Is that
Yes.
Is that a recent milestone?
It was passed in 2007,
Okay.
so about 10 years ago. So that's fairly recent, I would say.
It's not since the last report. I just wanted to.
55% now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone roughly from, I like to think of it, it was, in 1950, it was just below 1/3. And in 2050, we expect it to be just above 2/3. So roughly, over 100 years, this transition from 1/3 to 2/3 urban. That's an easy, convenient way to remember it, and it gives you a sense of the magnitude of this change that's taking place. When we say megatrend, I mean, that's quite significant for change over 100 years.
Thank you. I see one more question. Maybe we'll close with you then. Thank you.
I don't know if this is if this falls within the range of your specialty, but since we are in New York City, it comes to my mind like we, as all of us here are residents of New York City, we live there, we live here every day. So, in your opinion, what's the things that big cities in the world can learn from New York City, and what are the things that they should avoid from experiences here in New York City?
Well, I have to say, any answer that I give will only be in my personal capacity. But about New York City, I don't know. We probably all have our reflections on this, but I personally am amazed when I think about how this city works. You know, what is necessary just to make the infrastructure all come together and to make everything happen. So the level of organization that exists in this city and the administration, the way it's brought together, is quite astounding, and I would think that just how that is done would be an important lesson for other cities around the world, that New York is just very successful in terms of just operating at such a large scale. I'm a big fan of the City Bike program. I think it's changed New York City in a fundamental way for those of us who use it every day anyway. I think that's a lesson to be learned for other parts of the world. But other cities have been emulating that. That's become very common. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts on this? I'm just, this is off the top of my head. Like I said, this is no official answer.
Not really.
Okay, with that, let's move on to end on, and thank you, presenters, again today, and for all of you for joining us. Thank you.